Hey, tonight we're stepping into something messy, strange, and a little poetic, the wild world of getting drunk in medieval times. Back then, alcohol wasn't just for fun. It was safer than water, cheaper than church, and more reliable than any doctor. Before we slip into the story, feel free to like and subscribe if this is your kind of thing, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing that. Now dim the lights. Let the room get quiet. Imagine you're a 13th century peasant. You've been out in the fields since dawn, aching and covered in mud. You're bone dry with thirst. But instead of water, you reach for a mug of ale, not to catch a buzz, but because water could kill you. No one knew about germs, but they knew enough. Rivers were full of sewage, dead animals, and worse, buried in a shallow grave. The answer? Small beer. It was a weak, lightly fermented drink made from grain, barley, and whatever wild yeast happened to float by. It wasn't tasty or strong, but it was safer than disease-ridden water. Everyone drank it. Kids, nuns, even monks. Though, to be fair, monks had access to the good stuff. On average, medieval folks drank about a gallon of ale a day. Not always because they were drunkards, though some definitely were, but because they simply didn't trust water. Wine was costly and tricky to make up north, so ale became the drink of the people. It wasn't just a beverage, it was food, a calorie-laden cup of liquid bread, easier to swallow than whatever the local miller dared to call bread. And no, people weren't stumbling around all day. Small beer had just 1 to 2% alcohol, enough to kill germs, not start fights. Meanwhile, monks were perfecting something special: medieval craft beer. Between prayers and manuscripts, they quietly brewed their way into history. Monks weren't just brewing for fun. They ran full-scale operations from inside their monasteries, and they were brilliant at it. Why monks? Because monasteries were clean, calm, and full of literate men with time on their hands and giant pots to spare. Brewing became part of the daily rhythm, right alongside prayers, fasting, and quietly judging each other's penmanship. They brewed for guests, for pilgrims, for charity, and definitely for themselves. Let's not kid ourselves. Brother Pius was probably sneaking sips between prayers. Unlike peasants, monks wrote everything down. They measured, they timed, they tweaked recipes. They even introduced hops, the bitter little plant that made beer last longer and taste sharper. While the masses sipped weak ale, monks brewed the good stuff. Why? Because they could, and because during fasting, solid food was banned, but beer wasn't. So they created what they affectionately called liquid bread. Some abbeys became so skilled that people traveled just for the beer. By the 14th century, many were running the medieval version of craft breweries. Just swap out the hipster flannel for a habit and a handwritten brew log. Monastic beer became its own kind of brand. Even today, some beers still carry names from old abbeys, proof that monks knew just how sacred the bond between man and mug could be. Before tweets and timelines, there were taverns. In the Middle Ages, that's where everything went down. Weddings were planned, deals struck, gossip swapped, and yes, people drank until the room spun like a stained glass window. Taverns were the village's office. News feed and group chat rolled into one. You went to hear rumors, argue about taxes, or learn who'd been quietly kicked out of the church. Imagine Reddit, but smokier and with ale instead of upvotes. Inside, things were simple: a floor of dirt or straw, creaky benches, a fire, and a tavern keeper who might not have washed the mugs in weeks. On a good night, you'd get music, dice games, even the odd pig auction. The drink list? Mostly ale, maybe cider, wine if you had coin. But people didn't come for options. They came to let loose. In that dim, smoky room, a peasant might sit beside a merchant or a monk, and after 2 cups, someone always tried Latin. Then came the chaos. Not everyone loved taverns. Church leaders called them sinful dens, and city councils tried to control them with about as much luck as herding pigeons. But the truth? Taverns were vital. They held communities together, gave people room to vent, and offered a space to lose arguments, money, and memory, sometimes all at once. How drunk you got and how messy it got often depended on your social class. Getting wasted wasn't the same for everyone. It came in layers, like a wedding cake held together by hope and goat hair. At the bottom, peasants. They drank small beer or weak cider daily, not to celebrate, but to survive. It was their hydration, their calories, and one of the few joys in a hard life. They drank from wooden cups, clay jugs, or just their hands. Getting tipsy wasn't always the point, but feast days, someone always ended up in the wrong shoe.
Now climb the social ladder. Nobles drank wine, imported, spiced, expensive. It was all about status. Feasts were long, the goblets were huge, and the goal was indulgence with style. Wine-stained robes were fine. Vomiting on the bishop, not so much.
Then there were the monks and priests, floating in their own quiet bubble, technically celibate, occasionally sober. Monasteries brewed beer, while priests leaned heavily on wine, for sacramental reasons, of course. By evening prayers, many were already tipsy. But no matter your class, one rule stood firm. Don't waste it. Alcohol was precious. Every drop came from someone's hard work, brewing, storing, hauling. If you disrespected your drink, you might find yourself in a fistfight or the stocks. Drinking was a great equalizer. For the poor, it softened pain. For the rich, it puffed up pride. Some walked away with headaches, others walked away with stories. So what exactly did people drink to survive? Or just forget? First, ale. It was thick, unfiltered, and often closer to oatmeal than beer, brewed from barley or oats, or whatever the rats hadn't stolen. There was weak ale, strong ale, and the kind that made you hear angels sing. Then came mead, fermented honey water. Sweet, strong, and perfect for people who liked their drinks with a touch of drama. Finally, wine, mostly for monks, nobles, and southerners with grapes and questionable morals. Medieval wine wasn't the smooth sip you'd get today. It was usually weak, sour, and often mixed with herbs, spices, or even seawater. Yes, seawater. Nothing says elegance like a cup that tastes like brine and bad decisions. You also had cider and perry, fermented apple or pear drinks. Sweet, slightly fizzy, and dangerously easy to overdo, especially if you were already deep into a lazy day buzz. Then it got strange. Some drank brag, a strong mashup of beer and mead potent enough to strip paint. Others sipped posset, a hot mix of curdled milk and ale like angry dairy soup. There were also herb-laced wines claiming to cure headaches, curses, or demons. Did they work? Unclear. But 3 cups in, nobody minded. And yes, there was ale with raw egg, for strength, or stomachache, or both. But if regular days saw heavy drinking, feasts took it to a whole new level. These weren't calm affairs, they were wild celebrations with food, music, and endless booze. Getting drunk wasn't frowned upon, it was expected. Feasts could happen for weddings, royal births, or just a bored lord showing off a goblet shaped like a falcon. Toasts were long, loud, and sometimes poetic, and skipping one could look downright suspicious. Every toast brought more food, more drink, and more regrettable choices. Nobles sipped from gold or silver goblets, sometimes even carved horns, because even getting drunk had to look impressive. Meanwhile, servants rushed around refilling cups, clearing trenchers, stale bread plates, and quietly judging the scene. As the night wore on, so did the madness. People sang, wrestled, and launched into stories no one asked for. Some even dueled mid-feast over who had the better beard or the better punchline. And then came the entertainers, minstrels, dancers, jugglers, and that one guy with shadow puppets that should have stayed in the shadows. Too much mead could leave you wobbling home with roast goose in your belly, or passed out under the table beside a jester and a broken lute, swearing you'd never drink again until next week. Feasts were beautiful chaos, and alcohol, it wasn't just a drink. It was the glue, the spark, the fuel. Think beer pong, but medieval. The games weren't neat or organized. They started with laughter and ended with someone asleep in a turnip bin. One favorite, toasting wars. Not clever speeches, just drinking louder, longer, and harder than the next guy. These games weren't about poetry. They were about making it through each round without slurring your toast to the king's goat. Dice games were another favorite, played for drinks, coins, or questionable dares. The dice were rough, often bone-carved, and the rules, they changed based on who could still speak clearly. If cheating was accused, congrats, you just sparked a medieval bar fight. Another crowd pleaser, who can drink the most, the fastest. Simple name, huge appeal. It wasn't about prizes, it was about bragging rights and seeing who stayed upright the longest. Some men boasted of how many tankards they could down before collapsing in a bush. In noble courts, drinking games came dressed in manners. A lady might dare a knight to drain a goblet in her honor. He'd accept with flair, maybe recite a poem, and try not to burp during the finale. There were also games with wobblier results, balancing acts, dizzy spins, and spontaneous wrestling. Someone always ended up mistaking the minstrel for a monster. Winning wasn't the goal. The goal was laughter, bruises, and a stress test for every bench in the room. And yes, even the church got in on it, because when wine's involved, that's holy business. Wine wasn't just for communion. Monasteries produced barrels of it, officially for religious use, but somehow always with enough left over for reflection. Monks praised fermentation as divine, kept notes on vintages, and sometimes ended sermons with a slight slur. Some saints even embraced the spirit. Saint Bridget of Ireland once prayed for a lake of beer in heaven. Saint Arnold of Soissons told people to drink beer during a plague, accidentally saving lives. Science? Not quite, but lucky, yes. Religious holidays were prime time for feasting and drinking. Christmas, Easter, saints' days, they weren't just solemn. They were loud, joyful, and full of ale. Pilgrims stopping at monasteries received food, rest, and wine, just enough to make the next prayer walk a little wobbly, pass out near the altar. You were simply resting in holy company. Sure, the church condemned drunkenness, but enforcement was hit or miss. A noble might get a warning, a peasant got the stocks, a monk probably just reassigned to less liquid tasks. Truth was, in a world where beer was safer than water, someone always overdid it. And if tipsy turned into trying to joust a fence, that's when the town had to step in. Ah yes, the dreaded stocks. Medieval society's favorite mix of punishment and public theater. These wooden frames clamped your wrists, ankles, or neck and left you stranded in the town square, exposed to the weather, hecklers, and maybe a judgmental sheep. Landing in the stocks for drunkenness wasn't rare. If you got loud, threw up somewhere holy, or mooned a bishop, odds were you'd wake up clamped in place, nursing both shame and a hangover. It wasn't just punishment, it was spectacle. Everyone got to watch. Neighbors, friends, the blacksmith's nosy wife, kids tossed vegetables, monks muttered scripture, and someone always said, "Seen that one before?" The irony? It wasn't drinking that got you punished, it was doing it badly. Nobles could pass out mid-feast with no consequence. But if a shoemaker tumbled into a trough, that was suddenly society's moral crisis. The real concern wasn't alcohol, it was chaos. Stumbling drunks in public looked too much like rebellion or a spontaneous folk song. Some towns even had ale tasters to keep tavern brews mild, or at least mild enough for the mayor. Still, public drunkenness was more disgrace than crime. After a few hours in the stocks, you walked away stiff and quiet. but probably still planning your next pint. Hangovers in the Middle Ages were just as miserable as today, only without painkillers and without anyone feeling sorry for you. You'd wake up in a straw pile, church bells ringing like Judgment Day, and a goat glaring at you because, once again, you passed out in its stall. So how did they handle it? Mostly they just powered through. There were chores to do, no time to complain about the hammer pounding in your skull. You'd mumble something about sin and shuffle into the light. Still, a few brave souls tried remedies. One classic, raw eggs in ale, because clearly what wrecked you should also fix you. Others turned to vinegar, fennel tea, or bitter herbs that tasted like regret. Doctors, if you found one, would go on about humors, then bleed you a little. Great idea for someone already dehydrated. Some folks just kept drinking. Hair of the dog, medieval edition. The church, of course, had its own cure, guilt. Hangovers were seen as divine punishment. Repent, fast, and chew on dry bread. Most didn't call it a hangover. They just called it Thursday. But rest assured, it hurt just the same. You'd wake up, wipe dried ale from your face, and silently pray no one remembered what you did with the loot. Somewhere in history, alcohol was invented, and about 5 minutes later, someone got smacked in the face with a mug. Welcome to the world of medieval bar fights where your drink, your honor, and your off-key singing could all start trouble. Taverns were anything but peaceful. Loud, smoky, and crowded with people fresh off a long day of trench digging or horseshoeing, and now 3 ales deep. Fights sparked over anything, spilled drinks, bad dice rolls, unpaid debts, beard envy, or just looking too French. Yes, that was an insult. Some towns banned weapons in taverns, but rules were loose. Daggers, clubs, walking sticks, anything could become a weapon, and if you had nothing, a tankard or stool would do just fine. Brawls ranged from scuffles to full chaos. Sometimes the innkeeper intervened, sometimes he just sighed and counted broken tables. As long as no one died or no nobles got bruised, authorities didn't care. But if a merchant took a punch, stocks, fines, or worse, being banned from the tavern. Medieval exile at its most personal. Fighting was simply part of tavern life. You'd go in for a drink and a laugh. Sometimes you got both. Other times you left with a black eye and a story too wild for your grandmother's ears. And while taverns were often loud with men, the real backbone of medieval drinking, women. If you bought a mug of ale at the corner stall, chances are it was brewed, sold, or thrown at you by a woman. Enter the alewife. She wasn't just helping with beer, she was the brewer. For generations, brewing was seen as women's work, like baking or churning butter, only with more tipsiness and the occasional cursing from a disappointed blacksmith. Alewives brewed at home and sold their drinks through windows, jugs, or tiny stalls called tippling houses. Some kept things small, others ran full ale houses, but they had to be careful. If their ale was too strong, too weak, or made people hallucinate and wrestle chickens, trouble followed. Prices were fixed by law, and breaking the rules meant fines, public shame, or wearing a hat labeled bad brewer. Seriously. Then came tavern maids, serving drinks, cleaning tables, dodging drunk Oswalds. Tough jobs, tougher women. Some tavern maids flirted their way to better tips. A few even married well-off drunks and retired early, the medieval dream. But women weren't just behind the bar. They drank too, especially during weddings, festivals, or after a long day wrangling kids and a stubborn cow. Drunkenness wasn't exactly praised in women, but it happened. And if the ale flowed and the music played, no one batted an eye at a bawdy song or two. In the Middle Ages, if you were sick, injured, or just looked a little off, someone handed you alcohol. Could be a priest, a barber surgeon, or your grandmother. The answer was simple: have a drink. And sometimes it actually helped. Not because alcohol cured anything, but because a few cups dulled the pain of fevers, infections, or poorly timed jousts. This was medieval medicine, Alcohol served as painkiller, antiseptic, sedative, even breakfast. Doctors, if we can call them that, routinely prescribed wine or ale, warm wine for colds, mint wine for headaches, herbal mead for stomach aches. Monks brewed thick herbal liqueurs with wormwood or sage. Today we'd call it a digestif. Back then, it was medicine, and your best hope was that it didn't kill you first. Whether it cured anything beyond your dignity is debatable, but it did make you stop complaining, either from numbness or unconsciousness. On the battlefield, alcohol had a clearer purpose. It cleaned wounds, or more accurately, burned like fire and distracted you from the guy sawing off your leg with a farm tool. Sometimes the patient got a strong drink before the amputation. Sometimes they were the one holding the bottle. But alcohol wasn't just for wounds. It was prescribed for melancholy, plague symptoms, childbirth, recovery, even spiritual despair. If you were alive, odds were someone handed you a drink. Did it help? Occasionally. Did it make things worse? Also, yes. But in a world where bloodletting passed for medicine and leeches were practically interns, alcohol was at least pleasantly wrong. And of course, governments noticed. If people were drinking, someone could tax it. Alcohol fueled jobs, trade, and endless laws. Some towns even had ale conners, official tasters who judged beer for legality, quality, and foam. Not a bad gig unless you minded gout. Running a tavern required a license, though that could mean a stamped paper or just a handshake and a sack of onions. Serve without one, and you'd be fined or shut down quicker than a bad lute solo. Even beer had price caps. Ale prices were posted on wooden boards, and if tavern keepers charged too much, they faced penalties, at least in theory. In practice, if your ale was strong and your cousin worked for the mayor, rules got flexible. Then came the taxes. Ale taxes, wine taxes, malt taxes. In some places there were even cup taxes. Yes, fined for drinking from a goblet that looked too fancy. Welcome to medieval capitalism. Monasteries and nobles, of course, often dodged these taxes. Nothing says divine privilege like tax-free mead. Meanwhile, peasants were taxed on every weak batch they brewed for family gatherings. But all these rules didn't stop the drinking. They just made people sneakier. Some ran unlicensed taverns. Others sold ale off the books. Bribes worked wonders, and ledgers. Best not to look too closely. So a booming, semi-legal booze economy thrived, fueled by gossip, loopholes, and the basic need to relax after a long day. By the late Middle Ages, things began to shift. Distillation became more refined, turning wine into brandy, aqua vitae, or water of life, strong enough to clean wounds or erase entire evenings. Trade also brought change. Spices, sugar, rum, all added new flavors and status to drinking. Mead and ale began to fade as wine and spirits took their place at the wealthy's table. By the 1500s, taverns began to evolve. Some became inns or public houses, the earliest pubs. Drinking wasn't just a way to unwind, it became part of travel, politics, even the postal service. Yes, medieval couriers often rode tipsy. Then came the Reformation. Figures like Calvin and Knox weren't exactly tavern fans. Drinking turned into a moral issue. Taverns were labeled sinful, licensing grew strict, taxes rose, and public drunkenness became a crime. But the love of drink didn't vanish. It simply changed form. Alewives lost ground as brewing became a male-dominated, guild-controlled trade. Wine was regulated by officials. Spirits became courtly favorites. Slowly, alcohol shifted from survival tool to social indulgence. As the Middle Ages gave way to modern times, sanitation improved. Water got safer. Mead faded. But in the process, people began to forget just how deeply alcohol had shaped daily life, for celebration, comfort, or just getting through the week. Now picture this. In ancient Babylon, love wasn't gentle. It was war. You needed strategy, spells, and maybe even a demon or two. If charm failed, you'd curse a clay doll with your crush's name and bury it by their door. Forget flowers. Babylonians had magic. Ishtar wasn't your gentle, harp-strumming goddess. She once flattened a mountain range after getting dumped. So yes, she knew about vengeance. Babylonian love spells were intense. Some used hair, nail clippings, even blood, personal tokens tied to the soul of the one you desired. These were burned, mixed into oils, or tucked into cloth pouches. The pouches were then buried under doorways or hidden in beds to ignite desire. That heat sometimes led to obsession or madness. But what's love without a few side effects? It wasn't always about attraction. Some spells worked in reverse, to banish unwanted lovers or ruin a rival's charm. One spell even asked the gods to make a rival's breath smell like death. Subtle, brutal, effective. This wasn't love as hope. It was love as battle, a blend of ash, honey, blood, and whispered names. You didn't wait to be loved. You made it happen, pulling cosmic strings with dolls, smoke, and sacred words. Babylonian love wasn't mutual. It was forced, and when words failed, spells were whispered to the stars. Then came Greece, where love magic didn't soften. It turned sharper, with desire rooted in power and need, not poetry. Greek love magic wasn't about soft glances. It was frenzied, wild, and more likely to leave someone pleading at a temple than strolling hand in hand through an olive grove. Their magic split into two kinds, agog and philia spells. Agogi spells were forceful, used mostly by men to summon lovers. They aimed to spark lust, rob sleep, and drive the target to madness until they surrendered. A typical line, burn her heart until she crawls to me. Yes, crawls. These spells were etched on lead tablets and buried in graveyards or wells, gateways to the underworld. Spirits of the dead were often called upon to deliver the magic. If you wanted someone's love, you enlisted a ghost with time on his hands. Philia spells were gentler, used often by women to calm a marriage or keep a husband faithful. These charms brought peace, not passion, sometimes stirred into wine or oil, woven quietly into daily life. Herbs and potions added strength. Mandrake root, thought to scream when pulled from the earth, was a favorite. Others used honey, wine, crushed bones, and in stronger cases, even menstrual blood. Subtle? Not exactly. Effective, sometimes terrifyingly so. That particular ingredient, menstrual blood, was believed to bind a man's soul to his lover forever. Greek love magic wasn't about romance. It was strategy, raw emotion, and almost always about control, not consent. Eros, their god of love, was blindfolded and armed with arrows for a reason. Love wasn't sweet, it was dangerous. The Romans took that idea and ran with it, adding more wine, more flair, and plenty of legal gray areas. Roman love spells weren't just whispered by desperate hearts. They were tools for power, protection, and revenge. In a world obsessed with honor and reputation, bending someone's desire was like rewriting fate. Binding spells or defixiones were especially popular. Etched into thin lead sheets, these curses were folded tight and buried in tombs or dropped into rivers. The goal? Trap someone's mind, body, and spirit by calling on underworld gods like Pluto. Some read like love letters, others sounded more like desperate legal claims. One Roman spell begged that a woman named Viberna burn with love for me, Marcus, day and night, a plea he sealed by burying it beside a child's grave. Perfumes and oils added another layer. Laced with herbs like mint or belladonna, they could seduce or sedate, depends on the dose. A woman wearing perfume in ancient Rome might not just be trying to impress. She could be casting a love spell, drop by drop. One infamous potion, known as Venus wine, mixed exotic herbs, animal parts, and bodily fluids. It was rumored that slaves and courtesans used it to tip the scales with their wealthy masters. If it didn't spark desire, Maybe it triggered a vulnerable hangover instead. Interestingly, Roman law didn't treat love magic as a romantic misstep. It was filed under sorcery, a threat to public order if it messed with property, heirs, or politics. Love was fine until someone enchanted a senator into celibacy. For Romans, love was political, magical, and sometimes toxic, just how they liked it. In Egypt, love spells were sacred, poetic, and deeply tied to the divine. These weren't love notes, they were sacred rites written on papyrus, invoking gods like Hathor, Isis, and Bez. A broken heart wasn't something to cry over, it was something to summon for. One popular method was the dream spell, where a god or spirit whispered in someone's sleep. You long for her like the desert longs for rain, beautiful and strategic. Another spell described a heart as a trapped bird, fluttering madly unless returned to the spellcaster. Many Egyptian love spells were written in red ink, thought to hold magical power, and often included small drawings, bound figures, or birds with clipped wings, just in case the gods needed a visual reminder. But it wasn't all poetry and symbols. Physical objects carried weight too. Wax dolls stood in for the spellcaster and the target. These figures were perfumed, pierced with needles, or sealed in jars inscribed with love incantations. The results depended on intent. Want passion? Anoint the doll with lotus oil. Want revenge? Add scorpion venom. Potions played their part too, made from honey wine, mandrake root, and, yes, blood. One potent mix included menstrual blood stirred into beer, believed to bind a man's soul to a woman through shared essence. Try ordering that at a cocktail bar.
What made Egyptian love magic so unique was its divine layer. These weren't parlor tricks. They were sacred rituals rooted in hymns, charged amulets, and the belief that love and desire flowed from the gods.
But divine will could be nudged. Ingredients danced between medicine, mysticism, and poison. Hair, nails, spit, and menstrual blood held power because they carried essence. To bind someone's heart, you offered a piece of your own. Some love spells went far beyond hair and fingernails. In Babylon, recipes called for lion skin, crocodile fat, or feathers from night birds, creatures believed to live between worlds. In Egypt, scorpion venom might be mixed with myrrh to stir desire and a little fear. Rome took a darker turn. Some spells used the ashes of bones, sometimes from executed criminals. If love couldn't be earned, it would be dragged from the dead. One eerie Greek recipe called for bat bones ground with honey and wine, left beneath a statue of Aphrodite under moonlight. Drink it, and your target would be consumed with desire, or madness, or both. Many potions walked a fine line between love and poison. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake. Taken just right, they opened hearts. Taken wrong, they stopped them. Men often used spells to spark lust. Women worked more subtly, with enchanted clothing, food magic, or charm bags sewn with silk and herbs. These were tucked in beds, stitched into pillows. One Babylonian spell even told a woman to anoint her chest with sacred oil before embracing her lover, blending magic and touch. But not all love spells were tender. Some were curses wrapped in desire and sealed with vengeance. These spells weren't about love. They were about domination, humiliation, control. In ancient Greece and Rome, many love spells were actually defixiones, binding curses disguised in sweet words. A phrase like, "May she think of no other man but me," masked something far darker. The real goal was to break a person's will, to keep them sleepless, obsessed, emotionally enslaved. It was psychological warfare. Spells often asked underworld gods to bind a victim's arms, legs, tongue, even genitals, until they came crawling back. Curses were etched onto lead tablets, tightly folded and buried in graveyards, wells, or crossroads, places where the worlds of the living and dead blurred. One Roman curse begged Pluto to drive a woman mad until she searched the streets for the caster. Bind her knees so she cannot dance with another, bind her lips so she cannot kiss another. It wasn't love, it was emotional captivity, backed by ghosts. Sometimes a rival was cursed too. One spell from Carthage targeted a woman's competitor with hair loss, a decaying voice, and womb sickness. Even in poetic Egypt, curses crept in. Lion-headed gods were invoked to shred a lover's peace. Dolls were stabbed, burned, and bound, all in the name of desperate desire. Much of ancient love magic wasn't hidden, it lived in plain sight. For many, casting a spell was as routine as brushing hair or pouring wine. Magic wasn't separate from life, it was stitched right into it. In markets from Babylon to Athens, vendors sold more than figs and perfume. They offered charms too. Small amulets of carnelian, hematite, or bronze were worn to attract love or repel unwanted touches. Some looked like phalluses, others like hands or eyes. A young woman might wear one to catch a suitor's gaze. A wife might hide one under the mattress to keep her husband faithful. Magic also simmered in kitchens. In Rome, women stirred aphrodisiacs into sauces or served wine sweetened with enchanted herbs. Bread was kneaded with whispered spells. One Egyptian charm even told the caster to breathe into the pot and say their beloved's name 3 times. Dinner became spell work, each bite a quiet invitation. Even beauty routines held power. Greek women blended herbs into their eye makeup or lip color, believing it gave their gaze a magical pull. One spell suggested reciting a hymn to Aphrodite while applying rouge. Clothes too could carry enchantment, washed in blessed water and offered with hope. Once worn, a spell-washed shirt was said to cling like a net, subtle, quiet, binding. These weren't dramatic rituals with thunder and fire. They were whispered in kitchens, murmured in bedrooms, or stirred into bathwater. Love magic to the ancients wasn't just for sorcerers or scheming nobles. It belonged to everyone. But even with all their promises, ancient love spells were far from safe. They rarely came with happy endings. While many hoped for passion or loyalty, the results were often strange or dark. The same charm meant to draw someone close could also summon sickness, madness, or wrath from the gods. In Greece and Rome, philosophers and priests warned against tampering with another's will. Aratus mocked love potions as foolish tricks. Pliny the Elder called them dangerous nonsense, accusing their users of delusion or worse. Even the magical texts added warnings. Do not summon this spirit unless you accept what follows. And what followed could be haunting. One Roman tale speaks of a man driven mad by a failed charm, wandering the streets at night calling a name he didn't recognize. Another tells of a wife whose spell worked too well. Her husband became obsessed, paranoid, and violent. In Egypt, calling on Hathor or Isis without the right offerings could backfire. Instead of love, you got loss. One old scroll warned, if she's not meant to love you, your heart shall know sorrow tenfold. That's ancient speak for, don't force it. And spells didn't go unanswered. A targeted woman might hire a counter-magician to break the curse or curse the caster in return. These magical feuds could stretch for years, a quiet war of hexes and unbindings, guarded with salt lines and sacred words. Most unsettling, though, was how often love spells created obsession, not affection. The victim might feel a pull, physical, relentless, but emotionally distant. What was meant to be love often became compulsion, hollow and haunting. Still, even as Babylon's gods faded and Roman graves crumbled, love magic didn't vanish. It simply shifted. Ancient potions and rituals were reshaped into folk customs, whispered superstitions, and even bits of modern self-help. Take love potions. Science may scoff, but but today's store shelves are lined with teas and oils claiming to spark passion or boost attraction. Herbs like mandrake, damiana, and ginseng still linger, echoes of old enchantments. And in southern Italy, the echoes run deep. Red ribbons beneath mattresses, sachets in clothes, charms whispered through a grandmother's mirror, ancient magic still softly breathing. The old rituals didn't vanish, they simply blended in. Across the Middle East and North Africa, fragments of Egyptian and Mesopotamian love magic live on in quiet talismans, whispered blessings over meals, and charms worn close to the skin. Even in pop culture, echoes remain. Movies, books, and songs still tell stories of enchanted lovers, vampires bound by blood, wine laced with potions, passion spun from spells. The love spell gone wrong remains a favorite tale, echoing ancient warnings. What's forced by magic may collapse into chaos. Modern psychology even mirrors some of those old techniques, mirroring body language, using scent to stir memory, or confessing feelings at just the right emotional moment. Were ancient spellcasters really using early psychological tools cloaked in divine ritual? Today, love spells are still around, just rebranded. Online shops sell pastel-colored candle spells. TikTok overflows with manifestations and rituals that wouldn't look out of place on a papyrus scroll. At its core, ancient love magic wasn't just about winning affection, it was about reclaiming power in the face of longing. That quiet ache, that deep wish to be seen and chosen, it's still here. And if a little magic helps, so be it. The Olympic Games weren't playful competitions, they were sacred trials. Athletes trained for months, even years, watched by coaches, priests, and sometimes philosophers. Before competing, they swore an oath to Zeus, vowing to prepare honestly and never cheat. This wasn't symbolic. Breaking that oath meant public flogging or humiliating disqualification. And no, there were no tunics flapping in the breeze. Greek athletes competed fully nude. It honored the male body, but more than that, it showed there was nothing to hide. No tricks, no armor, just skill, strength, and the gods watching above. The earliest events were simple: foot races, long jump, javelin, discus, wrestling, and boxing. Then came the pancration, a violent blend of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules. Bones snapped, eyes were gouged, the crowd roared. Death was rare but not forbidden. Winners earned more than glory, a crown of olive leaves, yes, but also lifelong meals, tax breaks, and front-row seats at the theater. Poets praised them, sculptors immortalized them in stone. But women, they weren't allowed to compete or even watch. Their own games, the Haraya, were smaller and reserved for unmarried girls. The main stage burned with male ambition, divine pressure, and the will to win. Greek sport wasn't just physical, it was ritual, legacy, and a kind of war without weapons. But while the Greeks honored the body, the Romans reveled in its destruction. In the Roman Empire, athletics meant blood. No event captured this more than the gladiator games. These weren't friendly matches. They were violent spectacles built to thrill the crowds, honor the dead, and remind everyone who ruled. Most gladiators were slaves, prisoners, or criminals. Yet some became famous, like Spartacus, cheered by thousands even as they stepped into battle for public amusement. They trained in special schools called ludi, where discipline and showmanship were drilled in. The better the performance, the louder the cheers. Blood was part of the show. Rome's grandest stage was the Colosseum, a stone arena holding up to 50,000 people. Tickets were free, paid for by emperors chasing popularity. Bread and circuses, they called it. Keep the people fed and dazzled, and they won't ask too many questions. Combat came in styles. Some wielded swords and shields, others nets and tridents. Each had its costume, its tactics, carefully designed to surprise the crowd. Fights also featured sea battles, animal hunts, and public executions. Still, not every match ended in death. gladiators were expensive to train. Killing them wasn't always good business. Gladiators weren't just entertainment, they were investments. Only the editor, the person funding the games, could decide if a defeated fighter lived or died. And that famous thumbs up, thumbs down gesture, likely a Hollywood invention, ancient sources are vague. Despite the blood, some gladiators became celebrities. They got gifts, fan messages, yes, even graffiti praising their legs. Some earned freedom and went on to become trainers, guards, or minor stars. But long before Rome's arenas, the peoples of Mesoamerica played a game that blended sport, religion, and cosmic drama. Known today as the Mesoamerican ball game, or by its Nahuatl name, Olamilistli, this was no casual pastime. Played by the Maya, Mexica, and others, it featured a heavy rubber ball, up to 4 kilos, kept in play using hips, knees, elbows, and thighs. No hands. In some versions, players aimed to pass the ball through a stone ring high on the court wall. Nearly impossible. Courts, shaped like giant eyes, were carved with gods, warriors, and sacrifice scenes. These weren't playgrounds, they were sacred stages. The game told deeper stories of day versus night, life versus death. In Maya myth, it echoed the journey of the hero twins who played against death in the underworld. The most debated part of the Mesoamerican ball game, ritual sacrifice. Not every match ended in death, but many tied to sacred festivals did. And contrary to myth, it wasn't always the losers who died. In elite games, the winner, often the team captain, might be sacrificed as a noble tribute, ascending to the gods in glory. Others believe it was the losers, punished as part of divine justice. Either way, the game carried deep meaning. It wasn't sport, it was theology in motion. The sound of the rubber ball echoing across temple plazas wasn't just play, it was the heartbeat of belief and cosmic balance. In ancient Egypt, physical activity also walked the line between leisure and the sacred. Sports weren't for crowds, they were reflections of order, power, and eternity. Though Egypt lacked grand arenas, athletics thrived in tomb art and court rituals. Wrestling was a standout. Tomb paintings over 4,000 years old show pairs locked in holds and throws that resemble modern martial arts. These weren't games, they were training for soldiers and symbols of the fight between chaos and cosmic order. Archery, especially for pharaohs, was a blend of sport and spectacle. Shooting from moving chariots wasn't just skill, it was propaganda. For the Egyptians, a strong pharaoh wasn't just respected, he was seen as divinely chosen. Skill with the bow proved both strength and sacred approval. During festivals, kings would shoot arrows through copper rings, cheered on by priests and nobles, their aim a sign of divine favor. Rowing competitions also played a part, especially along the Nile. Crews of young men rowed in ceremonial regattas, their movements reflecting unity and discipline. These weren't casual races. They honored gods and echoed myths like Ra's journey across the sky. Everyday sports included tug-of-war, jumping games, rhythmic dance, and balancing exercises. Children flipped and climbed, while workers stayed strong through their daily labor. Festival games were lively blends of sweat and spirituality, uniting communities in celebration and faith. Women, too, had a place. Egyptian wall art shows female dancers and gymnasts at banquets and ceremonies, performing in honor of fertility and divine femininity. These weren't competitions, but graceful athletic displays filled with meaning. In ancient China, sport was also far more than muscle. It was philosophy in motion. Confucian ideals, military discipline, and imperial rituals shaped athletic life. And among them all, archery stood highest. It wasn't just skill, it was moral clarity in action. In Confucian tradition, a nobleman didn't just wield a bow, he embodied it. Archery was more than sport, it was a ritual of character. During the Zhou dynasty, contests were held in formal halls where hitting the target mattered, but so did the bowing, the phrases, the quiet control. Accuracy reflected inner virtue, not just aim. But not all Chinese sports were serene. Enter Juju, ancient polo, introduced in the Han Dynasty and wildly popular by the Tang. Fast, risky, and played on horseback with long mallets, it was the sport of emperors and generals. One emperor, Xuanzong of Tang, even died playing. Polo became one of the few courtly games where women joined in. Noble women in silk robes rode alongside men, striking with speed and grace. In a strict society, polo offered a rare moment of equality. Military games also thrived. Cuju, an early form of soccer, was designed to train soldiers. Players kicked a leather ball through a net or wall opening with skill and control. Over time, it spread beyond the army and became the world's first known form of football. Martial arts, too, were part sport, part soul. Early kung fu wasn't just for fighting, it shaped the spirit. Sparring matches and strength contests were regular features at festivals and academies. Even games like chess and Go were seen as mental sports, tests of strategy, calm, and control. The ideal athlete wasn't just strong, he was thoughtful, restrained, and morally grounded. In the ancient Near East, across Mesopotamia, Assyria, Persia, and beyond, sports were rarely just games. They echoed power, divine favor, and military strength. Athletic feats weren't isolated. They were woven into rituals, royal image-making, and the machinery of empire. In Mesopotamia, one of the world's first urban cultures, wrestling stood out. It wasn't formalized like Greek sport, but it was deeply respected. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's clash with the wild man in Enkidu shakes the city's foundations, yet ends in friendship. Their match wasn't just a contest, it was a moment of recognition and respect. Wrestling symbolized dominance, but also balance between equals. Kings, too, had to show physical might. Assyrian and Babylonian rulers carved their strength into stone. Lion hunts, military drills, and displays of raw power. These weren't vanity projects. They were declarations. The king can tame chaos. In Persia, the Achaemenid Empire pioneered structured military training, blending athletics, discipline, and ethics into a vision of strength shaped by purpose. Young boys in the ancient Near East were taught three things: ride a horse, shoot a bow, and speak the truth. Together, these formed a triad of skill, warfare, and moral training. Archery and riding weren't just practical, they marked elite status. Temples and festivals often hosted public competitions, races, stone lifting, and ceremonial fights. These events weren't just for fun. Watched by priests, nobles, and even kings, they reinforced the belief that the body, like the city or the cosmos, must be strong and orderly. Even games had meaning. The royal game of Ur wasn't physically intense, but it was mentally demanding. Sometimes it even doubled as a tool for divination. Success in play, like in battle, was seen as a sign of divine favor. In South Asia, especially the Indus Valley and early Vedic cultures, physical discipline was tied to social rank, spirituality, and inner balance. Though direct evidence of organized sport is limited, the clues are rich. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro had vast baths and courtyards, spaces likely used for communal rituals or physical activity. Terracotta figurines show dancers, acrobats, and wrestlers, proof that movement and performance were woven into daily life, not just for survival, but for beauty and belief. As Indian society moved into the Vedic period, physical strength took on new structure through Veda, the ancient science of warfare. Young warriors trained in archery, swordplay, chariot driving, and hand-to-hand combat. Royal festivals often featured competitions where princes displayed their skills to win honor and political allies. Wrestling or mala rose as a sacred sport. It wasn't just about muscle. Wrestlers lived by strict codes, moral, dietary, and spiritual. Many trained in temples, and the akara, or traditional wrestling school, functioned much like a monastery. Purity of mind mattered as much as strength of body. Ball games and dice also appear in Sanskrit texts. The word krida covered everything from racing animals to strategy games. Even divine figures like Krishna and Arjuna are shown in sport, using physical skill as metaphor for cosmic struggle. Yoga also emerged, not as gentle stretching, but as intense training for body and mind, aimed at spiritual liberation. Athletics wasn't for glory, it was for transcendence. Women's roles in sport were more limited, but not absent. Across cultures, women did train and perform, often tied to fertility or ritual grace rather than public glory. In Greece, they were banned from the Olympic Games, even as spectators, but traces of their strength remain. Though barred from the Olympics, ancient Greek women had their own games. The Heraia, held in Olympia, honored the goddess Hera. Unmarried girls raced barefoot in short tunics, their hair loose, opposite of married women's veils. There was no javelin or pancration, but winners still received olive crowns and, in rare cases, statues. In Sparta, women had far more freedom. Girls trained openly, running, wrestling, throwing, in full view of men. Their strength was seen as patriotic. Strong mothers raised strong warriors. While other Greeks were scandalized, Sparta saw it as essential. In Egypt, tomb art shows women dancing, leaping, and performing gymnastic feats during festivals. These weren't competitive, but they required real skill. Some even show acrobats mid-air, suggesting deep training in movement and balance. Rome offers a more complex view. Elite women avoided public sport, but some lower-class women and slaves performed as gladiatrices. Rare, but real. Confirmed by inscriptions. Wealthier women played ball games, swam, or trained on horseback in private villas. In Tang Dynasty China, noble women played polo, a sport shared with men. In flowing robes, they galloped through palace courts with grace and power. It shocked later historians, but for a time, they moved freely in a man's game. The stadiums may be silent now, but the spirit of ancient sport still echoes. From gold medals to roaring stadiums, modern sports do more than echo the ancient world. They carry its structure, its rhythm, and its heart. The Olympics, revived in 1896, were shaped by Greek tradition. Ceremonial oaths, olive wreaths, and even the sacred flame once lit for Hestia. The purpose shifted from pleasing gods to uniting nations, but the awe remains the same. Rome lives on in our grand arenas and league rivalries. The drama, the pageantry, even the uniforms and chants, it's all a softer echo of the Colosseum. Mesoamerican echoes still shape how we treat sports like ritual. Athletes are warriors, matches, battles, trophies become talismans. From Chinese archery to Persian training grounds, ancient games taught more than strength, they taught character. That spirit endures in martial arts today, where mastery comes with discipline and inner calm. Even forgotten games like Koju or Kreta are re-emerging, reminding us that play has many forms. Ancient sports were never just for fun. They were religion, politics, and pride in motion. So when an athlete today kneels, protests, or lifts a nation's hopes, they're not just competing, they're continuing a story older than any scoreboard, a story of power, identity, and legacy. The ancient world didn't just create games, it gave us the idea that through sport we could reach for something higher than strength or victory. We could reach for meaning, for honor, for a legacy just out of reach. Paris, famous for beauty, art, and romance, holds a secret beneath its charming streets. A second Paris, one stitched from tunnels, silence, and death. These are the catacombs, nearly 200 miles of underground passageways filled with more than 6 million human remains. Your descent begins quietly, down a spiral staircase into the chill of the earth. The noise fades, The light fades, and then you're there, in a space made of bone, skulls stacked in neat rows, femurs laid like bricks. Some walls even form crosses, hearts, and columns. It's eerie and strangely elegant. But this wasn't built for visitors. These tunnels began as limestone quarries back in Roman times. Paris was literally built from the stone beneath it, used for bridges, homes, cathedrals. By the 1700s, the old tunnels found a darker purpose. Paris was out of room for the dead. Cemeteries overflowed. At Saints Innocents, bodies began to seep into neighboring buildings. The city needed a solution, and the underworld was waiting. The smell was overwhelming. Disease was spreading. Something had to change. In 1786, Paris began an extraordinary task, removing the dead from overcrowded cemeteries and relocating them into old limestone quarries. At night, under flickering torchlight, workers hauled cart after cart of bones. At first, they dumped them. Later, they arranged them into walls, patterns, and eerie displays. It wasn't just about public health. It became a strange kind of art, a hidden city of the dead beneath the city of light. Victims of plague, monks, nobles, revolutionaries, all now resting together deep underground. The catacombs don't just store bones. They hold the quiet history of a city caught between elegance and rot. Back in the mid-1700s, Paris faced a crisis. The dead were everywhere. The worst sight was Saints Innocents, a cemetery used for nearly 1,000 years. Corpses piled deep, 6, sometimes 7 layers in shared graves. As the city grew, so did the horror. The stench seeped into churches, markets, even drinking water. By some accounts, basement walls near the cemetery began to crack open, leaking human remains. In 1763, King Louis XV had seen enough. He banned burials inside city limits, but the real reckoning was still to come. The church resisted. Cemeteries were sacred ground, they said. Bodies belonged in consecrated soil. But by the 1780s, things had gone too far. After a cellar wall gave way, pushed in by the weight of rotting bodies, health officials stepped in. The dead could no longer remain above ground, so attention turned to the city's forgotten quarries. Cold, quiet, and unused, these dark tunnels beneath Paris had once provided stone for its buildings. Now they'd shelter its dead. In 1786, the first bones were moved from Saints Innocents. The work happened at night, under veils of cloth and silence. Workers wore dark robes, carts were covered in black, and priests whispered prayers as they walked. It was solemn, surreal, and it went on for years. Cemeteries like Madeleine and Saint-Eustache were emptied next. The bones just kept coming. To bring some order to the growing stacks, officials began arranging them. Carefully, artistically, skulls were lined into walls, femurs were stacked like bricks. Some tunnels held patterns, crosses, hearts, arches. What began as a crisis became a strange form of architecture. A city of the dead beneath a city of life. The catacombs weren't just practical. They were Paris managing itself even after death. Hearts, crosses, arches, each shape built not just to store bones, but to turn them into quiet, eerie art. This transformation wasn't accidental. It came from the vision of Louis-Étienne Héricard de Thury, the early 19th century inspector of quarries. Where earlier workers had simply dumped remains, Héricard saw something more, a space that could offer beauty, structure, and a lesson in mortality. Under his care, the ossuary was cleaned, organized, and arranged into the haunting labyrinth we see today. The bones, once tied to names, lives, and stories, were now anonymous. No gravestones, no markers of identity, just walls made of ribs and skulls. Only small stone plaques remain, listing the original cemeteries and dates of transfer. Some sections include solemn poetry. One warns simply, "Stop. This is the empire of death." But it wasn't all art. Bones were also used structurally. Packed tucked behind retaining walls to help hold up the passages. The engineers knew if a tunnel gave way, it wouldn't just destroy a corridor, it might bring down a whole neighborhood. Early lighting was dim, with oil lamps casting strange shadows over hollow eyes. Today, electricity makes it easier to see, but not any less unsettling. This wasn't just an ossuary, it was an engineered underworld, a place where structure met sorrow and where silence spoke louder than any plaque. Every wall of bones was carefully shaped to remind the living. Beauty and terror often share a frame. Step deeper and the faces disappear. 6 million people reduced to nameless skulls. No epitaphs, no markers, just silent rows, watching. Who were they? Everyone. These bones once belonged to bakers, soldiers, servants, and midwives. Children, priests, mothers. People who once filled the city's streets, now stacked in its shadows. Some died of plague, the Black Death, cholera, waves of illness that turned graveyards into pits. Others fell to famine or childbirth. Some had rested underground for centuries. Others had barely begun to decay when they were dug up. Their transfer wasn't tender. Bones were shoveled, carted, and stacked, not with ceremony but out of urgent necessity. Yet not all were poor. Nobles and clergy lie here too. During the Revolution, as guillotines filled the streets with blood, many victims were tossed into mass graves, then later relocated to the tunnels where death lost its hierarchy and all became equal in stone. Some believe the bones of famous revolutionaries like Danton or Camille Desmoulins were moved here, but no one knows for sure. In the catacombs, titles disappear. There's even a section, Val de Grace, thought to hold the bones of monks and nuns once buried in quiet convent gardens until space ran out. And then there are the children, tiny bones scattered among the stacks. No names, no plaques, just quiet evidence of lives that ended too soon. Down here, all stories blur. 6 million lives folded into patterns, the plague-stricken and the poets, patriots, midwives, priests, all equal now, bone by bone. While tourists explore the official path, a well-lit mile of ordered bones, beneath their feet lies a hidden world, a shadow Paris, off-limits and alive in secret. This is where the cataphiles roam. They enter through manholes, forgotten trapdoors, or storm drains. There are no signs to guide them. Just silence, graffiti, and the pulse of the past. Some rooms are filled with murals, others with candles or old relics. A few even host illegal concerts, but for many cataphiles it's not about mischief, it's about memory. They see this place not as ruin, but as a city beneath a city, a sacred space where history breathes. Over the years, cataphiles have shaped entire rooms beneath Paris, secret libraries, hidden art galleries, even underground cinemas. Some host forbidden parties, lit by candles, powered by generators, and set to music echoing off walls lined with bones. It's surreal, eerie, and fiercely guarded. This world runs on trust. Outsiders are called tourists, and often tested before being allowed in. Respect is the highest rule. Never touch the bones, never mark sacred places, and above all, never get caught. Since 1955, unauthorized entry into the catacombs has been illegal, and not without reason. The tunnels are dangerous. Some sag and crack under centuries of weight. Others are pitch dark, flooded, or full of narrow gaps that twist and dead end. People have gotten lost. One man was found days later, disoriented, dehydrated, saved only by dogs trained to find the lost. Still, the cataphiles keep coming. The catacomb police, known as the cataflicks, can't keep up. Every time they seal an entrance, another opens. The draw is too strong. Down here, time slows, rules vanish. It's not just bones, it's belonging. The deeper you go, the more the silence turns strange. Arrows carved into the stone, poems half erased by time, faces scratched into walls. The tunnels speak. but not in words. They carry the voices of quarrymen, rebels, wanderers, and the long dead, all still here, watching. The first marks on these walls came from quarrymen, dates, arrows, initials, simple tools to track their path in the dark. Some etched their names with pride, like leaving a trace in the bones of the earth. Others sketched tools, flames or ships, not art for decoration, but for survival. Later, when the tunnels filled with bones, a new language appeared. Stone plaques from the 18th and 19th centuries labeled where the remains had come from. Some whispered grim poetry, "Where is death? Always behind you." Others quoted Latin, scripture, reminders that life is fleeting, death inevitable. But it's deeper in the forbidden zones that voices get louder. Graffiti blossomed in the 20th century, painted in flashlight beams. Some works are astonishing. Murals of glowing skeletons, mythical beasts, surreal faces rising from the stone. Others are more practical, arrows to exits, cryptic notes like GV 30 minutes to Montrouge. Each corridor has a name passed by word of mouth: the beach, the cathedral, the mushroom forest. Without this knowledge, even seasoned explorers can vanish. Signs of human presence remain: stone benches, candle holders carved into the walls, rusty door hinges. Some leave bottle caps or small figurines. Others stamp the walls like passports, quiet proof they walked here and found their way back. Quiet offerings in a place of endless night. In the catacombs, language becomes legacy. Every painted arrow, every carved name is part of a living memory, proof that someone passed through and wanted not to vanish. In times of war, this underworld was more than eerie, it was essential. Beneath the noise of bombs and shifting regimes, the catacombs became refuge, weapon, and hidden road. During the French Revolution, as guillotines fell, bones piled up below. Whispers claimed revolutionaries slipped through the tunnels at night, using the dark to move unseen. In World War II, the catacombs saw even deeper shadows. In 1940, the Nazi SS mapped parts of the tunnels and built a hidden bunker beneath Montparnasse. Reinforced and secret, it became a command post tucked inside the very bones of the city. But the resistance knew these paths too. French fighters used the tunnels to move beneath enemy lines, staging ambushes, hiding weapons, holding secret meetings. In this underworld, war played out in silence, ghosts chasing ghosts. The Fis of the time, explorers already familiar with forbidden sections, became critical. Their maps and memories turned the tunnels into a guerrilla maze. In some corners, the signs remain: faded graffiti, rusted cans, makeshift barriers, evidence that freedom once crawled beneath the city in darkness. During air raids, families fled into the catacombs. Bomb shelters were carved into the stone. While war raged above, they waited below, bones on one side, silence on the other, hoping it would end. After the fighting stopped, many of these tunnels were sealed, forgotten, but fragments remain: a rusted doorway, an old filter mask, a blackened wall. Long before the 20th century, these tunnels held secrets. But during wartime, they became something else entirely: a shelter, a weapon, a whisper of defiance from a city determined to survive. And where there's darkness, legends always follow. The Paris catacombs are rich with myth. Ghost stories drift through the stone like mist. One tells of a phantom quarryman, lost and still wandering. Others say he's a plague victim searching for his family in this endless library of bones. Visitors report whispers with no source, icy drafts, sudden dread, especially in the oldest parts of the ossuary. But the most chilling tale is modern. In the 1990s, a camcorder was found deep in the forbidden tunnels. The tape shows a man alone, lost, flashlight flickering. He begins to panic, spinning, running, until the camera drops. His identity remains unknown, so does his fate, but his fear That part still echoes. The tape ended in silence. The man was never found. Just a story now. The explorer who never made it back. Other tales drift closer to the surreal. Whispers of chambers deep underground, where bones form chairs and thrones, of secret cults holding quiet rituals in the dark. In the early 2000s, one sealed room was uncovered. It had electricity, a stocked bar, and even a small movie screen. On the wall, a warning: do not try to find us. Skeptics question the stories, but the myths cling to the tunnels like the damp. They grow in the hush between flickering light and stone, between silence and what you think you saw. Whether or not you believe them, fear breathes easily down here. The catacombs don't sleep. Today, they're one of Paris's strangest attractions. Tourists line up not for mourning, but for the strange thrill of standing among 6 million dead, selfies with skulls, death with a brochure. Opened to the public in 1809, the ossuary was once meant for quiet reflection. Visitors walked by lantern, sometimes led by priests. Now the lights are modern and the paths are safer, but the feeling lingers, wonder laced with unease, and still they come, the poets, the curious, the haunted. Victor Hugo once wandered these tunnels for inspiration. Salvador Dali called them beautiful. And for many today, the catacombs are a quiet pilgrimage, not just to face death, but to witness how carefully it's been arranged, stacked, and set in stone. Still, not everyone sees beauty here. Some call it disrespectful, a mass grave turned spectacle. A reminder that these aren't props, they're people, lives once full of love, hunger, laughter, and dreams, now reduced to silence. Yet the message still echoes. This city, like every city, is built on those who came before. Their bones hold up the boulevards, their shadows walk beside us, and when you rise from the dark, back into the bright hum of Paris, something feels different, more alive. Because death doesn't steal life's meaning, it sharpens it. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share if this moved you, and we'll see you in the next one.